Welcome to Colonie TV, the governmental educational channel for the town of Colonie.
Well, welcome to Meet the Author. My name is Joe Nash. Today we're talking to Richard Matturro. He is the author of 6 novels. We'll be showing them. He teaches in the English department over at SUNY Albany. He worked next door here for many years at the Times Union, actually in the library. And back here in our library in 2006, we had a great 4-week book discussion on Moby Dick. He's a big reader of Moby Dick. He was just telling me he makes his freshmen in college read it. The new book is called Janey, and it is part of his Tri-City Trilogy. So welcome, Richard. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you.
And I'll say right before we start, Richard's going to be here on April 21st. It's a Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. talking about this book, reading from it, and you'll be able to, if you want to come, you can ask him questions and stuff. So why don't we start with Janey? We're going to talk about the other books a little bit later, but why don't you tell us what is Janey about? And then we'll talk about the trilogy.
Okay, sure. Well, the title character is named Janey. She's Janey Heracles, and she's an artist living in Boston. She's 46 years old, divorced, and I should probably admit at the outset that she is a very disagreeable person, as you probably gathered when
I would agree that she's disagreeable.
She's edgy, cynical, shamelessly self-centered. A friend who read the novel in manuscript said he absolutely loathed her at the beginning, but by the end he had fallen in love with her. So I took that as a compliment. There is hope for her. Anyway, she's a person of very strong convictions, and one of her earliest decisions was that she did not want children. So, in her early 20s, when her boyfriend, Andy, asked her if she wanted to get married, she said yes, with one proviso: don't want children. Well, he being a young man in his 20s at that time also, he did what a lot of people do in their early 20s. He made a promise to feel exactly the way he did at that moment for the remainder of his life. Okay. Fast forward to their 24th wedding anniversary. Andy is older now, and he's realized that he has cut himself off from one of life's most important experiences, and he announces he wants a divorce.
This is when the book begins,
yes.
More or less, yeah.
And he wants to remarry, and it's not too late for him to start a family. Janey promptly moves out of the house and moves into her studio, which is located in a vacant Boston warehouse in Boston's South End, and it's where her studio is. There's no kitchen. There's no elevator except a service lift, and there's no bathroom except for a unisex toilet down the hall, but it's hers. And for her, it becomes her fortress against the world. It's at this point that she gets an unexpected call from her sister, Laura. The family had owned a Depression-era hotel. The parents now dead, the hotel long vacant, but they finally have a buyer for it. And her sister asks if she would please come to help her dispose of all their parents' belongings that are still in the hotel. Reluctantly, Janey agrees. She goes to Schenectady, where the sister lives, and there meets Bugs, an aging disc jockey on an oldies station, and ends up sharing quarters with him in the now vacant motel. And this is really the beginning of her 12 labors, which is what the story is about.
All right, so you mentioned the 12 labors. Now, I should say you're a big, I think you've taught classes in mythology. I know you're big in mythology. All your books have this sort of mythological frame or structure to it. And so in this book, obviously her last name is, do you pronounce it Hercules, or is it?
Well, Heracles is simply the Greek version of Hercules. Hercules is from the Roman.
And the 12, I should tell people, the 12 chapters are named after the 12 labors of Hercules. So why did you use this sort of structure or reference? Of all the myths to choose from, why the Hercules one? Any particular? Why do you do the mythology?
Well, I like myths in general because they tend to pare down human dilemmas into an interesting story, and that's essentially what modern writers do too. You want a story which somehow encapsulates human problems, human encounters, human dilemmas. The Hercules story is interesting. Hercules is the greatest, or probably the best known of all Greek heroes, and there had been an epic by one, can't remember the name. In any case, it was lost, and perhaps in the Great Fire of Alexandria, but it hasn't come down to us. But it concerned the 12 labors. Hercules was such a hero to the Greeks that they would often say, they would exclaim Heracles the way we would say, "Oh my God!"
Oh, okay.
It was simply an expression, but no great story has come down to us. I considered, when I was doing mythological stories, trying to write one myself, but never did. When I came to tell Janey's story, though, it seemed like the mountain she had to climb was so great that it might be a nice frame for this story. So I divided up the chapters into those 12 sections. So each one represented a hurdle, a challenge that she had to face, successfully or unsuccessfully, on her way to some self-understanding at the end.
And there are little references to the labors of Hercules. Not like he did it, but it's pretty.
Sure.
There's little things in there. Maybe when people read it, they can try and figure out. Now, staying in this little framework, the beginning of the novel, I think the first thing she says is, "I'm a prince," and then as Janey meets people, through the book, she always says, "Well, I'm a prince." She says this all through the book. Why does she say that? And obviously she's female. Why doesn't she say, "I'm a princess"?
Well,
you already mentioned she's kind of edgy, but
a couple of reasons. Well, first let's talk about the two words. We have very different connotations of the word prince and princess. When we think princess, we think of a young woman, beautiful, perhaps out of a fairy tale, innocent,
dainty,
eligible for marriage, and live happily ever after.
Okay.
Certainly does not describe Janey. Now, when we think of the word prince, if we call someone a prince, or we say he's a prince among men, we mean something very different. And we don't mean that he's descended from royalty. We mean that he is in some way superior, and an exceptional human being. And that's the way Janey thinks of herself.
Okay.
She thinks of herself as superior to most people, but especially to most women. Yeah. And not least of which because, and this is perhaps silly, but she's kept her figure. And she's very proud of this, to be 46 and still be slim, and she's done this by being very Spartan in her eating habits, although not in her drinking habits, and doing a punishing 5-mile run every day of the year. So this is Janey.
Well, there is. You're talking about feeling superior to other women. There's a scene in the middle of the book when she's at an art reception, and she's gathered around these 5 other women. And she kind of, what's the term? I don't know. She really, when she walks away, I can see them saying they probably didn't like her.
Oh, she is abrasive. Yes, she would not make it in the diplomatic corps.
Well, now this book is the 3rd book in your Tri-City Trilogy. We have the books here, and we can show them on the screen as we're talking. Janey takes place in Schenectady, and the Berkshires, back and forth. Leslie took place in Troy, and Luna was the Albany book. What's the How are these books? I mean, they all have. I should say they all have that little mythological
Yes.
story they parallel. So how are the books connected? And other than they all take place in our area, they're kind of fun to read because there's all these references to our area. But what?
Well, it might seem odd first that I wrote the middle novel last, but that's no stranger that I wrote the final novel first and the first novel second.
Okay. Well.
But it doesn't really matter because they're all self-contained. There's no continuing plot among them, and there are no recurring characters. They're not even chronological. Luna takes place in the 1990s, Janey in the 2000s, and Leslie in the 1980s.
Okay.
But the thread that connects them is that they are all about women who, for whatever reason, cannot accept the role that society, or maybe even biology, has assigned them.
Okay. Now, you do write all your novels. I mean, I'm not sure about the other three. I know these three. You do write from the women's point of view. Are the other three from the women's point of view? I don't know your other ones.
Oh, the ones that take place in the ancient
Yeah.
world. Let's see. One of them is.
Okay.
One of them is.
Well, then I guess the question is, here you are, written 5 books as a male. Why do you write from the female point of view? Is there a reason for that, or why do you approach it that way? Any particular?
Well, a lot of these
People might want to know that.
Sure. Parenthood figures greatly in these, and males and females both become parents, obviously. But there's a real difference in the parental experience between a man and a woman. To use an expression I really don't like at all, but is extraordinarily apt for this, women have more skin in the game, literally. And I've always been rather fascinated by women who choose not to go that route, who decide not to do what their bodies were designed to do and what society expects them to do. A woman who resists that pressure might be doing it because she's courageous, might be doing it because she's neurotic, or 100 other reasons. But in whatever the reason, I've always found it kind of interesting. That's why I write about it.
Oh, okay.
And it's hard to do it from a man's point of view, so I often do it from the woman's point of view.
Well, I guess, what was I going to ask you? Oh, yeah. Well, women who, or I guess men and women who don't have children or choose not to, I don't know what, they're usually accused of what, maybe being selfish or immature, or what, is that an accurate description of, I wouldn't say Janey's immature, but I don't know, what do you think?
Well, nobody likes either label. Nobody likes to be called selfish or immature. But, well, as a person who's not a parent myself, I suppose I should admit there's a germ of truth to both things. I suppose if you never have a child, you never feel the altruism that one feels when your child's life is more important to you than your own. That part is true. And I guess there's a way in which if you never have kids, you never quite grow up. So I wouldn't say that people are entirely wrong, although it's probably wrong for people to blindly accuse non-parents of anything without knowing their whole story. But anyway, even if it is true, even if both of those accusations are true, there are, in fact, so many unwanted children in the world that I think if you don't want them and you decide to follow through with that and not have them, you have probably done society a huge favor.
And yet, Janey, the character, I mean, it is something she really struggles with.
Yes.
As you read the book, I mean, you were saying, you decide not to have them, but it isn't just like you decided to have them and that's it. She really, it's a big dilemma for her, particularly when she there's some scenes when she goes to her sister's house. They have 2 kids, and et cetera. But
Yeah, she doesn't handle children well. She knows that. I'm not even sure that by the end, although she's come to some terms with her feelings, she's, I don't know, a few percentage degrees better.
Yeah.
But it's simply the way she is.
now, did you choose this? In the end, at the end, I'm not really be giving anything away, but do you think if Janey wasn't the age you portray her when the book ends, say she was still of childbearing age, you think maybe
would she have changed her mind?
Or would have ended there, and you maybe would have thought, well, maybe, I don't know.
Well, I doubt she would have changed.
Okay.
I really doubt it, but I don't know for sure.
Okay. Now, why don't you talk about the covers a little bit, because they're all, I know they're sort of in our Capital District area in a way. I know the middle one is. Why don't you talk about the covers, and as you're talking, we'll see them on the screen. And
Okay. The first one, Luna on the left, I should say, first of all, that all the covers were designed by Mary Trev Thomas, who is the assistant library director at Bethlehem Public Library, so a neighbor of ours. Luna, the cover there is of a now defunct amusement park, Lincoln Park, outside of New Bedford, Massachusetts.
All right, okay.
And what you see is a view from this weedy parking lot, because it's been long vacant, and even shrubbery and trees are growing up through the coaster itself. So a rather sad, empty, vacant, deserted landscape. The second one, Janey, some people in the Capital District will recognize, but it's a radio tower, and you see it rising up on this bleak, barren field with some woods in the background. Again, no one around. And the third one is taken on the boardwalk at Playland. It's an amusement park down in Rye, New York. All 3 of these scenes, by the way, take place in the novels. It too is deserted. You see just the empty bench and the empty boardwalk. And I think what Mary was after as she designed these covers was a sense of loneliness and barrenness. And she seems to have captured it in 3 different ways for the
like I
3
say,
different
in the other 2 books, the protagonists are women who decide not to have children also.
Yes.
Now, the Janey cover, that's right off, is that right off the bike path?
It is.
Down
Yes.
by Niskayuna or something?
Yes.
All right, because I ride my bike, I think I've...
Yes, and so the radio tower figures in the story.
Yes, it does, okay.
Fictional, of course, but
Well,
that's the radio tower.
Now, you're saying fictional, which leads to my next question. Are any of your characters based on people you know? I mean, now and like say the 3 protagonists are female, and there are men in them too, but are they kind of based on people?
Well, let's see. That's a dangerous question.
I know.
The best answer I can give is
Only if people that you know are watching. So
okay. Of course they are, and also, of course they're not. Like all writers, I take characters, people that I know, mix them up, juggle a lot of different qualities, and they come out in fictional ways. So Janey, for instance, is no one that I know, although I took characteristics from one person and another. Okay. Mostly the characters just come from, not to mention a large measure of them are the person I know best, which is me. So they're all compilations of people that I know.
All right. Well, now this is always a question authors probably hate, but do your books have a message? I mean, or is there something you want well, you're trying to convey something other than this mythological story, or you just want to tell a nice story or a good story or whatever?
It was Samuel Goldwyn, the movie producer, who once said, "If you got a message, send a telegram." Now today we'd say send an email or a tweet. I suppose occasionally I have a message that I would like to put in the book and convey to the reader. But the thing is, if you're doing your job right, and the characters are realistic, and the story works, the characters take over. And very likely, if everything's going correctly, your message, whatever the intention was, will get swallowed up in the story. And the main thing you have to concentrate on is not the message, but telling a good story. If you do it right, and one or another message comes through, great. But you can't concentrate on that, or you lose the storytelling ability.
Well, I mean, if you go back to the original myths in Greek and Roman, they were stories to convey a, what I don't want to say message, but a lesson or whatever. You're supposed to you are supposed to learn, I think, from reading literature, I would hope. Is that?
Yeah, I think that they managed that. They really did. They were able to encapsulate some really important human truths in the course of an interesting story. I mean, that's what you aim at. That's the ideal.
Well, it's always a good way to convey some truths to an exciting.
Sure.
Now, I know you worked next door in the Times-Union for many years as a librarian, and you've been writing on the side. Have you always been wanted to be a writer, or?
Yes, I always did, even from when I was very young. I still feel uncomfortable referring to myself as a writer because, well, frankly, 'cause I don't make a living at it. I feel much more comfortable saying I teach for a living, since that's what pays the bills. But I always knew I could write, even from when I was in elementary school. And I don't know why, I don't know where it came from, but I could do it. And I remember in 6th grade I wrote an essay about my grandmother. And the principal was so taken with it that he read it at his next Rotary meeting. But I didn't take it seriously until I graduated from college. I mean, I'd written a lot of papers, as everyone does in college, but no fiction. And like a lot of people today, when I graduated from college, I didn't have a job. So I had a lot of time on my hands. And I was visiting with folks who happened to live in the basement apartment below mine in Albany. And we got to talking one night over wine, and I don't know how we got on the subject of erotic literature, but someone made the point that most of it was kind of dull. And I said, well, of course it's dull, but it's because they don't, the characters are not well drawn. And for you to be interested, you have to be able to identify with characters. And then with all the chutzpah in the world, I said, I could do better than that. And
this is before you had written any fiction?
Before I'd written anything, yeah. And the next day, I must have been 20, 25, 20, something like that. I went up and opened my typewriter, and I was going to write an erotic story. And Leslie was born.
Oh, okay.
That day. Well, me being me, I couldn't write an erotic story. I got more interested in the character. And I started writing an actual story, a straight story, and I had this character on my hands, and she got more and more interesting to me, and I wrote and wrote, and eventually I'd finished 2 chapters, and I thought, oh, hey, this is good stuff. Boy, I'm pretty good, aren't I? And so I said, I think I'll send this in somewhere. Well, I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about publishing. So with all the chutzpah in the world, I sent my 2 chapters off to Doubleday. You might as well start at the top. And now this was 1974. So it was a different age. And they actually did read stuff that came over the transom in those days. Now they won't touch anything unless an agent has it first. But in those days, they actually read it. 2 weeks later, I get a letter back from an editor at Doubleday saying, she really liked it. Would I please send the rest? Well, this 25-year-old kid didn't have any rest, nor had he the ability to finish it. I simply didn't have it in me at that point. And I didn't realize the significance of getting a letter from Doubleday saying that they liked something that I read. So it took many years for me finally to sit down and write seriously again. But some of those sections that I wrote for Leslie are still in the book.
Well, that book didn't come out to what, 2000?
This one came out in 2006
Okay,
or
so
2008.
But by then you had written some other, okay.
Yes, but parts of it date back to 1974 when I first started writing.
All right, so what did you do? You just didn't
Well,
answer, you just didn't answer the...
I wrote some more, but I realized I just, I didn't have the ability quite
Okay.
yet. I didn't have the discipline, which you really need when you.
Well, how long? Okay, well, how long did it take you to sort of get that discipline? I mean, what kind do you follow now?
The first book that I got published was in 1989, and by then I'd figured out how to do it. Discipline, yeah, people talk a lot about discipline. I tend to write, if it's rewriting, I can do it just about any hour of the day or night. As long as something's in front of me and I've already written it, I can polish it up, change things, edit it, that's fine. But if it's the blank page syndrome, it's got to be the morning. That's the only time when I'll tackle something entirely new.
Okay. Now, what do you find the most difficult?
Oh, well, for me, it's plots.
Okay.
I would never make it as a mystery writer, where plot is king. No, plots are the most difficult for me. Characters don't seem to cause me much trouble. The only problem is having the reader understand the character as well as I do. Dialogue seems to come easily to me, but plots I find difficult. In fact, that's one of the reasons I usually turn to mythology, because I
get a ready-made plot there.
Yes, I have a starting point, and even though I may alter it a great deal, it gives me something to start with.
Now, why do you think dialogue comes so easily to you? I mean, in Janey, there was some great little scenes of dialogue in there. Why do you think that is, or any?
Well, people have always said my dialogue is very lifelike, and I'm not sure why. One of the things that I do though is I compose orally. In other words, I read the whole thing aloud as I'm going along. And so so I give it the ear test.
Oh, okay.
And if it doesn't sound like natural speech to my ear, well, I go back and rewrite it until it does sound like it would actually be the way people would
Have
talk.
you ever, you have this good dialogue. Have you ever written any little plays or anything? I mean, there's a great scene near the end of Janey where she's talking to her niece. And I don't know, it's a couple pages long, but it's a really nice, I've been thinking that would be nice on stage. There's a really nice little scene there. Have you ever written any plays or?
I haven't. Not since high school. I used to write skits for the dances in high school, but I haven't written an actual play since then. And it has crossed my mind. In fact, my editor at Livingston Press sometimes has said, I believe he said it in Leslie too, that the last scene in there was so much dialogue, there wasn't enough narration. And he said, put a little more narration in there, which I eventually did. And of course, if you write a play, you don't have to worry about any narration at all. It's just all dialogue. The only problem is, with novels, it's still something that you can sit down and do all by yourself, and if you're lucky, get published. Right. Whereas with a play, there are many other hoops you have to leap through to actually get them produced. And I don't live in New York, and so it's not something I ever attempted. But who knows?
Now, do you have any? If anyone's watching, now you've given us some great little insight into your writing process. What the age-old question? Do you have any advice for other writers? I guess.
Well, I probably shouldn't give any advice, but hell, you're asking me, so I will. First, and I think this is the most important, learn to read your own stuff objectively, as if you were a reader who knows nothing about it. Because as a writer, you can't sort of run along the side and explain what it means. It's all got to be there. So you have to learn how to be your own editor, someone encountering your writing for the very first time. That's number one. Two, by all means, let friends and family read your work and offer comments, but be very judicious in taking advice.
Would you have to say to them, pretend you don't know the writer?
Well, that would help, although it's harder, I think, sometimes for them. And usually, if they're good friends and family, they probably won't tell you that anything is bad. So that's why I say take their advice judiciously. But even if you get an objective person to give you advice, be careful, because no great writing ever came out of a committee. Okay. So it's got to be yours, ultimately. You have to make the decision. Third, be entertaining on every page. And by entertaining, I don't mean be jolly and make people laugh, but you've got to engage the reader, be interesting on every page. Well, in every paragraph. You just can't let them go. I remember someone once wrote into the newspaper, they wrote to the dinner date editor and said, what do you look for most in a restaurant reviewer? Should they be a graduate of a famous culinary school? Should they have gone to the great restaurants in Europe? Should they be a former chef? And the editor wrote back, the most important quality in a restaurant reviewer is that they be entertaining. And that's your job as a writer.
Well, I think you also want people to see what's going to happen next. I would
yeah.
think going on. Well, now you got your trilogy. What are you working on something next, or do you have something down the road? Are you staying with this mythological structure, writing from a female point of view?
Well, actually, this next one is, yes, and what I've taken is, the next one is it is the classic of female rage. It's Medea.
Okay.
Do you know the story of Medea?
I think so. Is there?
Okay. This is the classic myth about the woman who kills her own children. And if you'll indulge me, I actually have the blurb that's going to go on the back right here.
Is it already written, or is it partly?
Oh, it's written. And
okay.
It'll be coming out this year. Though set in Bronze Age Greece, it's told as a modern novel. Medea is the awkward, introverted daughter of a royal family, growing up in a remote backwater of the Greek world. An escape from this stifling life is offered by the arrival of the dashing and feckless Jason, for whom Medea gives up everything to follow him back to mainland Greece. There she bears him twin sons, then watches helplessly as he falls out of love with her. His announcement that she will be exiled, minus her two boys, so that he can marry the king's daughter, brings on the final catastrophe.
All right, so you're going to be following the tragic heroes.
But here's why I'm interested in the Medea story. There are many different accounts of her life. And the interesting thing to me was that they all agreed in one regard. After having murdered several innocent people, including her own two children, she never met with any punishment, human or divine. All versions of the story agree in that regard. Why was no penalty ever exacted for this classic embodiment of female rage? So that's why I was fascinated.
Is that going to be is that part of your story?
Sure.
Now, you're basing it on the myth or the play? I get it mixed up. There's a play.
The play is one of the versions of the myth.
Okay. So are you sort of incorporating?
Yeah.
All right.
But of course, even Euripides lets her go off scot-free.
Okay. All right,
she gets off. In fact, the last scene, she is defiant, and she leaves on a dragon-drawn chariot provided by Helios, the god of the sun, and she ends up in Athens, you know, the most enlightened city on earth, and they give her sanctuary. So I left all the supernatural out of.
Well, your book takes place, like these books, it's a modern retelling.
No, this one does take place in Bronze Age
okay,
Greece.
so, all right.
But I have eliminated all the supernatural, so it's
Okay.
told as a realistic novel.
All right. Well, and that comes out when?
It'll be out sometime this year, also from Livingston
Okay.
Press.
Well, if you want to hear more from Richard's work, he's going to actually read from Janey on April 21st. It's a Sunday afternoon here in the library, 2 p.m. He's going to read from Janey. If you want to ask him any questions, come on in. The library, we have all your books. We try to keep our local authors happy. We have a lot of copies of your books. So thanks for coming, Richard, and maybe we'll see you in the fall when your Medea comes out. That sounds a little different from me. All right, thanks. Well, thanks for watching Meet the Author, and we'll see you next time.